Hi guys, Christina from Bellwether Fields. Today we're going to tell you everything you need to know to plaster a chink line in your log cabin. But first, before we get started, please subscribe to our channel. Please smash that like button. This really helps us with the YouTube algorithm and it helps us make videos that you guys want to see. Also, if you have a comment for us or a question, please leave them down below. We will answer each and every one of you, and we really appreciate all of the comments and the questions that we've gotten so far. So let's talk about from tools to mixing, to knowing that the plaster is the right consistency, and to applying plaster on the walls. Let's take you through the entire thing right now. Let's talk about your plastering tools. So you're only going to need a few. First is this guy. This is my favorite. It's a trowel. It's a very pointy one, as you can see, and I like it because we can get into like super tight corners with this thing. Next, we have two other, we'll call them skinnier trowels. These are helpful in those really tight chink lines. You know the ones I'm talking about, the ones that are really, really slim. We use both of these, mostly the slimmest one. And then the final one is just a putty knife. Just a regular old putty knife, super helpful. So we have found that really these three tools are the best tools to use for this type of project. And I know that we see some other videos online with people using different tools, and we can talk about when we're doing the application, why these three tools are the best and probably really the only thing you need to successfully plaster your chink line. To mix the plaster, you're going to need a drill, and probably not the one that you have at home already. We had to buy a special drill because it needs a lot of power. So the plaster is really tough. This is the drill we use right here. It's super sturdy, super powerful, and it has a lot of handholds because if you're mixing the plaster in the bucket, it's going to kick back at you and you're going to be able to hold on tight with this type of drill. So this is the one we use. We'll link it down below. Let's talk about that mixer itself. So you can just get this cheapy mixer from Home Depot or Lowe's, this little egg beater mixer. You don't need anything fancy or special. I think this thing is about $9 or $10. The one thing you need to know is you don't want it to rust. These rust really easily, so you want to make sure that you wipe it clean after you finish mixing. You don't let it rust, because if it does get rust on it, that's going to ruin your plaster. But otherwise, you don't need any special tool. This is going to work great. When you mix your plaster, you're going to need a bucket. We use a 5-gallon bucket from Home Depot or Lowe's, and we put some water inside. We only need 4 inches of water. So we're going to measure it with our measuring tape. We just put that right down in the bucket. 4 inches of water is all you need to have a completely full bucket of plaster, and that is going to last you a pretty long time, especially when you're new and doing plaster for the first time. So 4 inches of water, no more. If you're mixing plaster for the first time, maybe you want to use even less than 4 inches of water, but that's all you're going to need for a full 5-gallon bucket of plaster. This is our plaster. We use Gypsolite plaster made by Gold Bond. So when you listen to those videos online on YouTube and you hear people talk about base coat plaster or scratch coat plaster, and they talk about finish coat plaster, this is what they're talking about. This is base coat scratch coat plaster, and it's the only plaster that we use for the entire log cabin project. One thing I want you guys to know, everything we've shown you so far you could get from your local Home Depot or Lowe's, or even order it off of Amazon, but this product you cannot. So we're going to list all the details down below and link where we get ours locally, just so you'll be able to find a product similar or with the exact same product.
Hey everyone, we've seen a ton of awesome YouTube videos about plaster, and yet not one ever went into how to actually mix it. So here you go. It's pretty straightforward. Here's what you'll need to do to get the right consistency and how to tell when you're there. You start out with your bucket and 4 inches of water. Dump a generous pile of plaster and start trying to mix it until it's smooth. When you got that, dump in a smaller amount and repeat, mixing it until all the dry bits have been incorporated into the mixture. You'll see me use a pumping motion, guiding the beater down to the bottom of the bucket and back up repeatedly. Keep doing this until you really have to work to incorporate the dry plaster balls at the surface into the wet paste at the bottom of the bucket. As the plaster gets thicker, you're going to have to wrestle with it a little. I found squeezing the bucket with my legs was a pretty effective way to keep the bucket from spinning. Having your partner press on the bucket with their boots is pretty helpful too. You're shooting for a consistency much like peanut butter, so test it out when you think you're getting close.
All right, we're going to do a test. Let's see where it's at. I'll show you how to tell. You got a clean glove. You're just going to come down and grip it. It's not bad, actually. This feels a little soft. It's definitely too wet. So that's on the top, actually. When you get to the bottom, you grab this stuff and you go to let it go, and it's still clumping to the glove. Not ready yet. So that's pretty close. We're going to add a little bit more. All right, you don't need to add all that much. Try to get it into the bottom if you can. Try to leave a little hole in there. And get that plaster down into. Don't overshoot it. It's better to do that a couple times than try to add more water to it. When you start to see this happening, where you pull it out and it all kind of clumps up with you, you're either there or close. So I'm getting down to the bottom. I can tell that the bottom's still too soft. Coming onto the glove. So we were going for a consistency like peanut butter, and I think we got it. It is soft enough to be moldable, but it's not runny. And what you're going to want to do with this, what we're doing as we're chinking, we'll show you, is that we're going to take this by hand, break off little chunks, and then squish that into the space and stuff it in there, and then smooth it with a trowel. So it's got to be firm enough to stick to the lath or whatever you're trying to stick it to. But you don't want it to be too dry, because it will dry in an instant if it's too much plaster in there. And we had experiences with that where it was rough, we hadn't even smoothed it, and it was practically already dry and we had to scramble. So don't do that. Make sure it's the right consistency. And this is ready.
So we're all set up here with our bucket of plaster that we mixed outside. That's what you guys just saw. And I'm just going to work directly out of the bucket. That gives me the longest time and use of the plaster. And it's just easy. I have my tools down here that you guys saw outside. I just have them like sitting on a paper towel. And let's talk about the chink line that we're going to be working on today. We're going to be working right here between the log and the floor. You can see this gap, this open space here. We were going to fill it with trim at one point, but we decided against it, and now we're going to plaster it. So we're going to go down this entire line here, and then if you look up above, this is what the chink line will look like after we're done. So this is the exact same type of plaster. Okay, for those who are watching our videos, you'll know that we're up in our real finished space. This is our loft space, and we have it basically done. So we're working on just a tiny little chink line here. We've got a couple of places that we're going to fix with the plaster. And really, if you're doing plaster for the very first time, you should probably put something down to cover the floor. I have not put anything down to cover the floor because I'm a professional. Just kidding. Actually, the plaster is really easy to work with. So if it falls on the floor and it dries, just let it dry in its little hard bits. You can sweep it up with a shop vac. It's no big deal. And if it leaves like a little spot on the floor, like a little smudge, you can just go back with a rag with like soap and water and just like wipe your floor. So on the whole, this is a really great beginner's plaster. We have had no issue with it like staining or ruining anything, and I think it's really easy to use. Okay, so now we have to talk about creative choices. Because there's a lot of variation in our logs, we have to make a lot of choices when it comes to how we want the plaster to look when we apply it. So let's take a closer look at the chink line we're going to work on today. So looking down at this chink line, you can see that there's a giant gap here. And we're probably going to fill that entire thing with plaster. And as you follow it along to the left, it gets smaller and thinner. This is probably more normal sized chink line. And then over here, you can see that it's connected to the wall. And so we need to decide like how much plaster we're going to put in here or whether we want to stop the plaster here. So these are all the decisions that go into doing your chink lines and working on your house. This is what makes it fun and really a handmade house and something that you make with your own hands. But these are the things you'll think about as you're applying the plaster. Since this is small over here, I'm going to start with the putty knife and this other tool that's really like the small tool. I'm just going to scoop some stuff up on my putty knife. You can also do this with your hands. And then I'm just going to apply it just like that to the chink line, right? And what I'm doing is I'm trying to fill the space. So it's fine if you get it on the logs. It's very easy to scrape off, right? It's very easy to scrape back on your tool. You see how nothing's falling here? Again, that shows that you have the right consistency. If nothing is falling off your tool onto the ground, then you have the right consistency. And again, easy to maneuver, easy to manipulate. You're just going to shove it into the gap. And again, like I said, we have to make some kind of creative decision here about what we're going to do. But first I'm going to start where there is an opening and try to fill the opening so I can get a look and feel about how the line actually looks. And this crevice is pretty deep. So even if you do lath, which there is no lath on this particular section, it was just very difficult to get it in there, you are going to have to use a lot of plaster. So the lath is there to help the plaster stick, but if you're trying to fill the entire hole and get the look of a filled space, you're going to have to make sure that you're really shoving it in there and then smoothing it out, right? So I usually work on a section like this, again going back just to get like a little scoop on my trowel. And then I'm really just taking that, see how I'm just like folding it, folding it, folding it. I'm just pushing it right into that gap right there. And it really works a lot better when there's something for the plaster to hold on to. And usually the best thing for the plaster to hold on to is other plaster. So I don't know if you guys just saw that, but there's a large piece of plaster that kind of was up on this log and it folded over. I don't really want to fold that into the chink line because then I'm going to have dust and debris and stuff that came off the log in my chink line. So I'm just going to scrape those pieces right off. And then I just go about smoothing it. And you can, again, this is another creative decision. You can decide like how much smoothing you want to do. Some people like a really rustic chink line, and some people like it to be as smooth as possible. So it just depends on your particular aesthetic and kind of what you're going for your log cabin. Okay, so I said before that we're going to talk about some of the tools that we use and why we think these 3 tools that we use are the best. This plaster is really heavy, and so when you go through and you're making this kind of motion over and over again, pushing it into the chink line, it is very difficult to do over and over again. It's just a very repetitive motion, and you're going to really wear out your wrist, that motion, that angle that you have here, and you will wear out your fingers. So the reason that we use like smaller tools and we have less plaster to start with and we work in smaller bits is because you really want to make sure that you are not having any issues with like putting the plaster into the chink line because it's too heavy basically. And I think you can see there like very easily, I mean like you're watching this in real time, that I was able to push the plaster in and some of it was just like going into the dead space, but now that plaster is back there and it has something to hang on to, it is just building up and we're able to again match the chink line depth of the other section that we just previously worked on. And again, I'm just going to scrape that right off. I'm going to just do that to keep my chink line as clean as possible. I'm also feeling for the depth of my hand, right? So I'm making sure, especially with these long trowels, it's very easy to make sure that you're getting a very similar depth as you work along the chink line. But I'm making sure that everything is even and everything is smooth. And then this is getting even deeper. You can see I'm just going to push it right in there, right back into the space. And for these that I know are going back into this hole, I don't care as much about it being clean, right? I'm not trying to get it too dirty, but if there's any plaster from before that's still good, that might have been dirty just because it kind of hit the log or whatever, I'm just going to shove that into the hole. No one's going to see that, and it's not going to be part of your finished product. What you're trying to do is just get enough plaster back there so that you can have good looking plaster stick to it on the top, and you're going to get a good looking finished product, right? So just feeding it in down there and see how easily and quickly it builds up. It didn't take very long at all, right? So it looks like a sizable gap to begin with, but then as soon as you put a little bit of plaster back there, the plaster likes to cling to itself, so it's going to easily fill in this gap. Right? And then again, we don't have metal lath here, but as you can see, it's not a problem. Having metal lath makes it that much easier. The reason I really like the metal lath is because it is rodent proof, so if you have a rodent problem or mice that like to chew things, they can chew through the plaster if they really wanted to, but the metal lath they wouldn't be able to. So it's just an added benefit of the metal lath. makes it a little bit easier. But like you can see, we're not having any problems or any issues. Now, if you look closely, this is white on white. It's probably hard to see, but there's some plaster down here on the floor. It's no problem at all. I don't think that there's any reason to tape it. You can just wipe it right off. In a minute I can go get just a paper towel or a wet rag, and I'm just going to wipe a line and it'll be absolutely fine. Same thing up here. If you see this plaster that's like marked the log a little bit, once that dries I can come back with a wet rag and just wipe that right off the log. No issue at all. Another technique that I like to use, especially when there's a really big gap like this, is I'm going to push some in and then I'm going to push it towards the finished part of the chink line. Again, maximizing that ability of the plaster to stick to itself and create like kind of its own structure and support. Okay, so when we talk about the process of smoothing the plaster, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get a connection between the floor and the log up top. Right, so I'm trying to make sure that the plaster is making connection with both of those things, and I'm trying to get a very smooth line across. Also, when you draw your trowel along this plaster, it pulls water out of the plaster, making the plaster smooth and shiny. So the more that you're able to draw the trowel across the plaster and flatten it out, the smoother and kind of more shiny it will become. It's still going to be a matte product, but it will have a different luster than if you just kind of put it up there and didn't smooth it. We're going to get to this bigger section of the chink line down here. And I'm going to show you how I load this. Okay, so Gabe alluded to this previously when we were mixing the plaster, and that's why we look for this consistency. We're going to make tiny little balls like this, maybe even smaller than that. And now we're going to use our hands with our gloves and just smush it in. That really does not work very well when the chink line is too small. But when we get to something that is as big and kind of cavernous as this, it works great. And it actually helps, your hands, because again, you're not using this motion all the time with the tools. So it's better for your wrists and your fingers and your joints. And it gets the plaster in there quickly, and then you're able to move on to the smoothing process. And so I'm going to load a good bit of this so then I can come back and smooth it. But again, I'm pushing, quite firmly, making sure that again it's making that connection with the top and the bottom of the log, or in this case the floor. And we decided very early on how we wanted our profiles to be, so that we want, some of the log exposed here. But again, all of that is up to personal style and kind of your own craftsmanship and kind of creative decisions. You can see again, it's a pretty big one, but just a few of those balls of plaster, and right away that is all blocked up. And then you can come back and smooth. So again, as the line gets bigger, you can use the larger tools to smooth the lines. Again, you're going to get some buildup on your putty knife, so you're trying to get it to the same kind of level as the other plaster that you've put on. But you can see really easily how smooth it's getting. And maybe you can see some of that luster coming out. And again, if you're looking really closely, you can see that we need a bit more putty here, right? We're not making that connection between the wood and the plaster. But over here, we're doing pretty well. Basically just blended it into the line that was already there. Like that. Sometimes when you're plastering a chink line, you might miss a spot. And that's totally fine. And we're going to show you today how if you have a hole in your chink line, you can go back in and plaster over that and it's no big deal. Okay, so when we were working on this plaster, we did this entire line and everything was fine, and I came back and I realized after we had taken the windows out that I could see some light. So I put a piece of tape over it. So let's take a look. There it is, just a little piece missed on this chink line. Now we can't see any more light. And that's it. So this is the entire process. Now you know everything you need to know to use plaster in your chinking in your log cabin. So thanks so much for watching. Again, if you have any questions at all, please put them below. Any comments, we welcome those too. We will write back to you regardless of what you really put down there. And we really appreciate you guys watching. See you next time.